In the winter of 1888, on the shore of Lake Superior, an old Ojibwe man was dying. Local memory says he called his grandson to his side and spoke for 3 days. No transcript survives, no missionary recorded it. Whatever passed between them belongs to family memory now, not the historical record. But something else from that same decade did survive, buried in Smithsonian correspondence, not in any published report. A government surveyor, writing home from the Keweenaw Peninsula, described finding a mining pit sunk so deep his crew never reached the bottom. Inside it, massive wooden support timbers buried under sediment that suggested an age far older than anything American archaeology was prepared to admit. His letter described it. His official report never mentioned it. That gap between what was found and what was published runs through the entire story of copper mining in the Great Lakes. And it starts with a number that still doesn't add up. Somewhere between 500,000 and 1.5 billion pounds of copper were pulled out of this ground thousands of years ago. Archaeologists have found almost none of it. Today we're tracing where that copper went and why the men who found the evidence chose not to talk about it. Lake Superior sits on something almost nowhere else on Earth has. Along its southern shoreline, especially across the Keweenaw Peninsula, the rock holds native copper. Not ore, not copper bound up with other minerals waiting on a smelter. Pure metallic copper sitting in veins inside ancient basalt, ready to be worked directly with stone tools. Every nation in the Great Lakes region knew about it. Copper appears in oral tradition going back further than any date archaeology has been willing to accept. The official record calls this the Old Copper Complex. Archaeologists date the mining to somewhere between 5,000 and 1,000 years ago. And the mining wasn't small. Current estimates put the total copper extracted somewhere between £500,000 and £1.5 billion. Sit with that range for a second. It's not a narrow estimate. It's a gap of nearly 3 orders of magnitude, because nobody has ever been able to pin down how much copper actually came out of this ground. According to the conventional account, the people mining it were nomadic, small bands, no permanent settlements, no administrative structure, no reason to mine at industrial scale. That account has a problem. Industrial scale mining isn't casual work. Pits sunk dozens of feet into solid rock. Fire setting, heating stone, then shocking it with water to fracture it. A technique that requires fuel, timing and coordinated labour over months, not days. This isn't something a handful of people do between hunting trips. And then there's the copper itself. Where did it go? Archaeologists have traced some of it. Copper tools, ornaments, ceremonial objects turn up in burial mounds across Ohio, Illinois, Missouri, as far south as the Gulf Coast. Each new find gets folded into the same explanation: trade networks moving raw material and finished goods across the continent. But add up everything that's been found in those mounds, in those burial sites, in every excavation on record, and it's a fraction of what the mining pits suggest was pulled out of the ground. Not a small fraction. A rounding error. Millions of pounds of worked copper extracted over thousands of years, and archaeology can account for only a sliver of where it ended up. The pits are still there. The scale of the extraction is still there, written into the rock itself. What's missing is everywhere else the copper should be, and isn't. That gap sat unexamined for most of the 19th century. Then, in the 1840s, the Smithsonian sent surveyors north to look at it directly. What they found in those mining pits, and what they chose to leave out of their published reports, is where this story gets complicated. The copper wasn't just extracted, it was inherited. For the Ojibwe and for every nation along these shores, the relationship to that copper stretches back further than any written record can confirm. It shows up in oral tradition as something already old when the oldest stories begin. That's the context for a story that comes down through family memory in the lake country of the upper Great Lakes. In the winter of 1888, an Ojibwe elder was dying. According to family memory passed down since, he called his grandson to his side and spoke for 3 days without stopping. No transcript survives, and no missionary recorded it, no institution catalogued it. What passed between them belongs to that family, not to any archive, and it should be treated that way, as memory rather than verified testimony. But the shape of it tells you something on its own. Knowledge like that isn't handed down casually. In Ojibwe tradition, certain categories of knowledge belong to specific lineages, carried by specific people, passed on at specific times. It isn't shared indiscriminately. An elder spending his final days transmitting it to one chosen listener fits a pattern of knowledge treated as something to protect, not something to broadcast. Here's what makes the timing worth noting. While the elder was speaking on the shore of Lake Superior, government surveyors were actively working the same mining pits his ancestors had worked for thousands of years. And the people conducting those surveys were not asking the Ojibwe what they knew. That's not incidental. Through the second half of the 19th century, native testimony about the mounds, the mines, and the people who built them was treated as folklore at best, irrelevant to a scientific record being written entirely by outsiders. The people whose ancestors had mined this copper for millennia were not considered a source. They were, at most, a curiosity to be studied alongside the artifacts. So whatever that elder passed to his grandson in 1888 was never going to reach the institutions writing the official history. Not because it lacked value, because nobody with the authority to write that history was interested in listening. That silence matters because in that same decade, something else was happening 200 miles away. Smithsonian surveyors were pulling artifacts and evidence out of those same mining pits and writing letters describing things their published reports never mentioned. If you enjoy documentaries that dig past the official record into oral tradition, buried correspondence, and the parts of history institutions left out, consider subscribing. It helps me keep chasing stories like this one. Because what those surveyors found in the ground and what they chose to publish about it don't match. In 1848, a Smithsonian surveyor working the Keweenaw Peninsula wrote a letter to a colleague describing something his official report never mentioned. He'd found a mining pit sunk deep into the rock, deeper than his crew could fully clear. At its lowest accessible point sat a series of wooden timbers used as structural supports. Not small branches, wedged in place. Massive timbers moved and positioned with what he described as clear engineering intent. Based on the depth of sediment covering them and the condition of the wood, he estimated an age far beyond anything the accepted timeline for the region was prepared to accommodate. That estimate appears in his letter. It does not appear in his published survey. This isn't a single missing detail. It's a pattern. Across 19th century Great Lakes mining archaeology, the gap between what surveyors privately observed and what made it into official publication shows up again and again. Field notes describing anomalies, published summaries that quietly leave them out. The standard explanation is that the surveyors were simply mistaken, untrained in dating methods, prone to overestimating age. That's possible. It's also the explanation that requires nobody to reconsider anything. The other explanation is less comfortable, that what they found didn't fit the story already being built about who had lived on this continent and how long ago. Because 1888, on the same year the elder was speaking to his grandson, was also the year the Smithsonian published its position on the mound-building cultures of the Midwest. Officially, unambiguously, the mounds were credited to a separate vanished race, not the ancestors of the native peoples currently occupying the land. That claim wasn't a fringe theory. It was the institutional position of the most influential scientific body in the country. And it served a purpose beyond archaeology. If the mounds and the mines had been built by Native Americans, that meant continuous habitation stretching back thousands of years, a claim that mattered enormously to people actively being removed from that same land. If they'd been built by a vanished separate race instead, dispossession could be framed as nothing new, just the latest replacement in a long line of them. An elder was transmitting his lineage's memory of that land in one language. The Smithsonian was publishing a very different account of that same land in another. Neither was listening to the other. Only one of them controlled what became the official record. The pits stayed in the ground. The timbers stayed buried. And 200 miles northwest, on an island most people have never heard of, the same pattern was about to repeat, on a much larger scale. Isle Royale sits in the northwestern corner of Lake Superior, 45 miles from the Minnesota shore. Long, thin, mostly cut off in winter and lightly visited even in summer. It's also one of the most significant archaeological sites in North America, and one of the least examined. The island holds ancient mining pits by the thousands, not dozens, not hundreds. Thousands cut into copper-bearing rock over a span of centuries, ranging from shallow test holes to substantial excavations. Many show evidence of fire setting, heating rock, then shocking it with water until it fractured. That technique isn't improvised. It takes planning, fuel supply, water transport and labour working in coordination. When Smithsonian surveyors reached the island in the 1870s, they found more than pits. They documented stone alignments, refused deposits suggesting extended habitation, not brief seasonal visits. In places, arrangements of stone too regular to be natural formations and too substantial to be temporary shelter. Their published reports describe these findings carefully and cautiously, not as evidence of an organised society running industrial-scale extraction over thousands of years, as interesting features that merit further study. That further study mostly never came. In 1906, 18 years after the elder's death, the US government began converting Isle Royale into a forest reserve. By 1940, it was a national park. That designation protects the mining pits from casual disturbance. It also means they've never faced the kind of serious, systematic excavation that might finally answer what's sitting at their deepest points. The structures the 1870s surveyors noted haven't been thoroughly investigated in the century and a half since. Preservation, in this case, functions a lot like deferral, intentional or not. And the copper from these deposits carries something that makes the missing copper problem even harder to explain away: an isotopic signature, a chemical fingerprint specific to Great Lakes copper, distinct from copper mined anywhere else on Earth. Apply that signature to artifacts found across the continent, and Great Lakes copper turns up in burial mounds in Georgia, in ceremonial sites in Louisiana, across the Ohio River Valley in contexts spanning thousands of years. That's not a local mining operation. That's a supply line running the length of the continent, sustained over an enormous stretch of time. And still the volume recovered archaeologically falls far short of what extraction on that scale should have left behind. Isle Royale isn't a footnote to this story. It may be the centre of it, sealed under protected status, unexcavated, still holding whatever answer the pits were built to keep. Some archaeometallurgists have looked closely at old copper complex artifacts and found something that doesn't sit comfortably inside the conventional account: the grain structure of the metal, the patterns of work hardening and annealing. In certain pieces, a geometric precision that's hard to explain using only the stone tools and simple fire technology the standard timeline assigns to this culture. The cautious explanation is that we've underestimated what skilled hands can achieve with basic tools, given enough time and practice. That's reasonable. It's also, again, the explanation that leaves everything else undisturbed. What's not in question is the scale of what's missing. Millions of pounds of copper extracted from pits that took generations to dig, worked by people organised enough to run fire-setting operations and move material across a continent. And archaeology can point to only a fraction of where it ended up. The 1848 surveyor's letter is still sitting in an archive describing timbers his published report never mentioned. Isle Royale's pits are still protected, which means still unexamined. The isotopic trail still runs further than the record can account for. None of it proves what an elder told his grandson in the winter of 1888. That transmission belongs to a family, passed down as memory, and it deserves to stay that way, not flattened into a claim it was never meant to make. But it's worth asking what that elder's lineage actually knew, sitting on the shore of a lake their ancestors had mined for thousands of years, while 200 miles away an institution was publishing a very different account of who built what and how long ago, and to whose benefit. The people who lived closest to the evidence were never asked. The people writing the official record had already decided what they were willing to find. That's the real gap in this story. Not between what was extracted and what was found, though that gap is real and it's enormous. The deeper gap is between what was known quietly by the people who'd carried that knowledge for generations, and what got written down by the people who weren't listening. The pits are still there, the copper's still missing, and somewhere in family memory along Lake Superior's shore, a piece of what actually happened is still being carried by whoever was trusted enough to receive it. We don't get to hear it. Maybe that was never the point. If you enjoy documentaries that dig into buried correspondence, oral tradition, and the parts of history institutions chose to leave out, consider subscribing. It helps me keep chasing stories like this one, and I'd like to know what you think. Do you think that gap between what was extracted and what's been found is explainable by ordinary archaeology? Or does something about this story not add up? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next documentary.